Hey, Margie here. You may have heard how beneficial it is to eat from the rainbow. But what does that really entail? And how can we do that most effectively? Well, that's one of the topics we're going to delve into today with our very special guest, Deanna Minich. And Deanna is a nutrition scientist, educator, and author with over 20 years of experience in academia and in the natural product industries. She has been active as a functional medicine clinician in clinical trials and in her own practice. She's the author of 6 consumer books on wellness topics, 4 book chapters, and over 50 scientific publications. Through her talks, workshops, groups, and in-person retreats, she helps people to transform their lives practically and artfully through nutrition and lifestyle. And I'm really excited about our talk today because Deanna gives us so many great tips that are going to make such a difference for our bones and overall health. So stay tuned. Welcome, Deanna. I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast. I've been a fan of yours for so many years. I love the work you do, and I love that you deal with the rainbow because I love colors. So,
well, thank you. It's a delight to be here having a conversation with you about bones, happiness, colors, all kinds of things. So I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's start because you're a person of food. You deal with food and you've dealt with the science of food. And so what would you like to share? Because we're a community of people who care about their bones and overall health. But I know you have so many things that you teach. So where would you like to start?
Well, I think we need to think about like all of the different messages about nutrition out there. So I've been in nutrition long enough to see things come, things go. And the things that I feel most passionate about are the things that seem to have like staying power. So what has been around that most people can do? And I like to think about 3 principles within nutrition science: color, creativity, and diversity. So I'm not a person that gets attached to a certain dietary dogma where I say everybody needs to be going keto or everybody needs to be vegetarian or everybody needs to be a carnivore. I really do think that this is the age of personalized nutrition. However, the common denominators are truly color, creativity, and diversity. So I'll just go through each of those a little bit because I think they apply to bones, they apply to our overall health, and quite honestly, they even apply to happiness and curiosity and our overall feeling of contentment with our lives. So the first one is color. You were saying that you're really into color, and color is as much psychology as it is physiology. It's even botany. It is interior design. It's everything. Even for people who can't see colors, I'm told that they can even sense color. Color has a vibration, a frequency, a resonance to it. So if we think about color within plants or color within foods, many times those colors are connected to a functional signature of the food. So I have an operating system that I use that I have in my books. So I talk about the spectrum of colors and then the spectrum of foods and then the inherent benefits of those foods. So when it comes to bone, specifically, since I know your audience is really primed to hear about that, I think a lot about the anti-inflammatory types of phytonutrients, and they tend to be more in the red category. Red, purple. Of course, there's overlap onto all of the different colors, and it's not that any one color is the only color, but there is something to be said for red-colored, purple-colored foods because many of those polyphenols that make those foods that color, we are now learning that they have a gut effect, they have an anti-inflammatory effect, they have antioxidant effects in the body. And when we're thinking about healthy bones, we need to be thinking about that balance of the inflammatory potential and oxidative stress. And I think that red-colored foods tend to be pretty good at that. So that would mean things like raspberries, strawberries, cherries. Cherries would be one particular one. In fact, just the other day, I bought a bottle of tart cherry juice, and it's really tart. What we're aiming for here is not so much the flavor profile of something very sweet, but we're looking for things that might be bitter or sour or have other taste profiles as well. So bringing in some of those red colored foods can be important for cardiovascular system, anything that will play into inflammation. As it relates to orange colored foods like oranges, mango, tangerines, persimmons when they're in season, carrots, orange bell peppers. The orange color is connected to carotenoids. So carotenoids would be things like beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, beta-cryptoxanthin. So a lot of these different carotenoid compounds, which actually are beautiful in nature, and that's what you see when it's autumn, when you start to see that the green of a leaf starts to degrade into all of the different colors that are underneath. So that's why spinach or sometimes the different greens that are out there actually contain the red, the orange, and the yellow compounds that you don't directly see. So when I think about the carotenoids, I think about reproductive health. I think about hormone health. I think also about the fat-soluble antioxidant benefits that these carotenoids have. So if you eat a lot of these orange foods, what can happen is your skin can start to turn a bit orange. So that's for good reason, because the carotenoids do go into the matrix of the skin, the epidermis, kind of lodge in there. So that's why I usually talk about skin health and carotenoids, and especially thinking of ramping up one's diet in carotenoid-containing foods, especially before you have more sun exposure. So I think that is just one easy thing to be thinking about. Then there's yellow. I often think of yellow as connected to the digestive tract. I think about things like proteolytic enzymes found in yellow foods, like whether it's pineapple. I'm thinking also about ginger and its motility effects on the gut. I'm also thinking about acids like lemon, whether we're thinking of the bioflavonoids that are helpful in liver detoxification. So there's a lot that goes on in the gut and many different types of characteristics that would be useful. So the enzymatic aspects, the catalytic aspects of things like acids, also looking at the prebiotic effects of certain starches that we might find in yellow vegetables like squashes. So I think yellow in general, but most people are getting way too much yellow, but the wrong kind of yellow, like the overly processed yellow. And actually, I just want to mention for you, because you are into research on happiness, that when people were surveyed, and this happened in Manchester, England some time ago, where they had a color wheel and they asked people their favorite color and their mood state. And what they found was that people who were not anxious or depressed tended to favor the color yellow, like a bright, sunny kind of yellow. That was like the favorite choice. Whereas people with altered mood states tended to like gray. So, you have to think, is the color that we're drawn to connecting into, more than we realize? Like, are we actually taking on the color of our environments, or even the colors that we're wearing, the colors that we surround ourselves with? So I often like to start when I'm working with workshops or groups, and I'll ask everybody, what is your favorite color? And most people will say, oh, I don't like yellow. I don't look good in yellow. But it's not just looking good in a color. It's like, what is the color that gives you that sense of optimism, happiness, joyfulness? And typically yellow is that color, that bright yellow. So whatever room you want to be happy in, bringing in a lot of yellow types of fixtures, or even painting the walls yellow. I remember I had one house where I wanted more uplifting in the kitchen. So I painted the walls kind of this yellow orangey color. And I remember, you get a different feeling when you're in a room like that, right? Where the color is really making that psychological connection.
It's so funny because I use the analogy because I just think life should be full and joyous. And I used to tell people my definition of happy was a state of peace and well-being regardless of your circumstances. But I felt it was missing something. So what I added to my definition is to live life in color. And I show in my slides a picture of Wizard of Oz in black and white.
Yeah.
So many people just sort of exist. And as you said, if they're depressed, they may just feel gray. And then versus when it's a vibrant color, it's just so different in terms of your mood. So I'm loving this. But that's interesting in terms of the processed food with the yellow. What processed food is yellow? I'm trying to think what processed food you're referring to.
Gosh, so many crackers, cookies, breads, cakes, bagels, ready-to-eat cereals. I mean, if you think about it, most people, when they start their day off for breakfast, when we need the most amount of nutrients after a nighttime of detoxification, many people are opting for brown, yellow, and white breakfasts. And of course, you can have healthy versions of yellow, brown, and white, but most of the versions that we see, and I think that there's a rhyme and a reason for this in some ways, right? Like when we see a lot of the processed foods out there, they look enticing. Many times they are hyper colored with whether it's colorful sprinkles or dyes or other additions to make it very psychologically enticing. So yellow foods, when I think of that, I'm thinking like the pastas, a lot of the breads, corn chips, corn products in general. So, most people, when I ask them about yellow, they're getting way too much in the way of the unnatural or at least the highly processed yellow foods.
Got it.
I also think about green. Green is, so whenever I'm asking audiences, what are your favorite colors? Green and purple are always the colors. And then sometimes I'll get red. But green is definitely up high on the list. And actually, that is my favorite color. I love green. I love emerald green. Green is the color of the heart. Many people think that red is the color of the heart because of the red color of blood. But actually, I associate green with the heart because of all of the different nutrients that are in green colored foods. So things like, if we're talking about leafy greens, I'm thinking magnesium, folate. I'm thinking about B vitamins. I'm thinking about potassium. A lot of those greens. In fact, even if people are on blood thinning agents, many times you're told not to have so much in the way of green foods because you can alter the coagulation properties of the blood just by having these green foods. We also know that some of the green foods contain nitrates. So the nitrates, when we take them in naturally in plant foods, when we take them into the body, we can convert those to nitric oxide, which can then have a vasodilation effect. So some of these green foods, they are I remember a study, this was a publication from Dr. LaChance and Dr. Drew Ramsey. And Dr. Drew Ramsey is a nutritional psychologist, and he had this great paper published some time ago in which they looked at antidepressant foods. They looked at all of the different nutrients that would help in the pathways related to depression. And then they looked at the foods that would contain those nutrients. And I remember the greens were at the top of the list on the plant food side of things. So watercress. And, sometimes people get very concerned about some of these greens because they think, oh, wow, what about oxalates? What about a lot of these anti-nutrients? And what I would say there is that basically, so much of these anti-nutrients will vary depending on the plant food and also how we prepare it. So I think that there are a lot of ways around certain of these aspects. So it's important to kind of look at the traditional formats in which food was consumed, because I think that people have opted for these more trending methods of preparation, like raw kale smoothies, like 16 ounces every day. That's not something that our genes have seen over time. That's a relatively newer way of taking nutrients in.
That's a very, very big topic in this community, the oxalates. So you want to just share, you mentioned in terms of what are your favorite preparations? I know there have been some studies about boiling, ways to reduce oxalates. And it's an actual upsetting topic because so many wonderful foods, unfortunately, do have oxalates. And not everybody is susceptible, but there have been so many people who actually reducing the oxalate content change their symptoms if they were sensitive to them. So what are your favorite ways of reducing oxalates?
Well, exactly what you said. Slow, low, moist methods of cooking tend to be favorable for reducing them because there are different types of oxalates. You have insoluble, you have soluble, and you want to reduce the soluble oxalates specifically. So if you have water, then they can better solubilize. I also think we need to look at our overall mineral status. This is especially important in bone. And there was a study, and I don't have all of the details at my fingertips right now, but essentially they're in the paper that we published some years ago, in which if minerals are sufficient in the diet, so our calcium, our magnesium, then we have less issue with oxalates. The other thing to consider with oxalate sensitivity or intolerance is the gut microbiome. In fact, there is at least one lab I can think of where they look at the oxalobiome, which would be the different microorganisms. And, there's, I think, one specifically that is most responsible for the degradation of oxalic acid. So sometimes oxalates, yes, there is a degree of people where they're hyper-absorbing, and I believe that percentage is something like 10 to 15% have some heightened absorbing property of oxalates, or maybe even some issues with kidneys where they need to be more sensitive. I think that there are other things we have to look at, like the issue of the gut. Is there dysbiosis or an imbalance of the gut microbiome that is leading to greater uptake or to greater conversion of secondary metabolites that could actually cause greater issues there? So I don't think it's just like an easy answer, but for some people, it's just easier to avoid those foods, or at least to minimize them. But I would definitely say that minerals, I know that you probably have had many different people talk about minerals, and I have such a love of minerals. I feel like together with phytonutrients, they're like the underdogs of nutrition. And it's like nutrition is a relationship, and each of the minerals have relationships with the other. So if you start dosing too high on one, or even you're dosing high on a vitamin like vitamin D, you need more magnesium, because magnesium is required for those hydroxylase enzymes that converts that precursor vitamin D to the active vitamin D. So sometimes we can provoke a deficiency or an insufficiency of certain minerals just by way of supplementing our diet with certain nutrients. So there is a very tender relationship there. The other thing that most people don't realize is that there's a relationship between essential minerals like zinc, calcium, iron, selenium, and heavy metals. So toxic metals like whether it's lead or cadmium or mercury, because they look alike chemically, so they're divalent cations, they have got that +2 charge, right? So they kind of look similar to the body. So one can compete with the other. So if we have too much in the way of toxic metals, many times it can reduce the uptake of essential minerals and block the bioavailability. So one of the ways, and I think that that toxin load is on the rise. It's important for us to think about with bone health, because as we become perimenopausal, go into the menopause, and then postmenopause, what's happening is we're getting a loss of bone mineral density, so osteopenia. That liberates a lot of lead into the systemic bloodstream. So, and that has been thought to be connected to things like cognitive impairment in the perimenopausal and even postmenopausal time. Now, that hasn't been kind of worked out as like the final say, but there can be some anticipated surges in things like heavy metals that have been sequestered in bone over time as we go through those hormonal changes. So making sure that we have sufficient minerals, I think, is really important. I know magnesium is like a darling. People love magnesium. I love zinc. I think zinc is incredible for so many things. In fact, I was just looking at my father's labs this morning with my mom, just kind of giving them guidance. And, so many things we can be looking at as it relates to zinc, our immune system, our liver enzymes. Zinc is an important player in, I would say, building the matrix of mucous membranes. So that's why we heard a lot about it during the pandemic. But, they're all important. I just call out zinc, but quite honestly, goodness. I mean, if you have an imbalance of one, then none of them are really playing together well. So I know we got kind of waylaid here talking about minerals and oxalates, but I thought it would be a necessary kind of a movement into a different topic just because of your group.
It's really important. But I have a good question for you. Since you're a nutrition person, you believe in food first. What would be some good foods because I think a lot of people in this community just rely on supplements and they don't realize that we can get a lot of these minerals also from our foods and people. So I think if you want to share some of your favorite sources.
Well, I would be thinking about things that grow in the earth, roots, tubers, because they tend to, things that are in the soil take in what is in the soil. So that's for better or for worse. So typically you're going to find that things that are in the ground are going to be higher in minerals. Not always the case, but they're, many times I think about tuber type of vegetables or nuts or seeds, which aren't always in the ground, but they can be. But also leafy greens and leaves above the surface can also be part of that. If I think of high mineral foods on the animal side of things, I'm thinking of seafood like oysters. I'm thinking of, we just have to balance that, of course, with rotation, which brings me into, you're asking, can't people just get enough minerals from their diet? I think maybe. And I think it depends on the person. It depends on their needs. It depends on the foods that they're consuming. Because I do think that our soils have changed depending on the quality that we're taking in. And not everybody, a lot of those minerals are bound up in fibers. And so if we don't have good digestion, we can't actually access those minerals. And the minerals, again, are big players in helping us to reduce toxin load. So I think that it depends. It depends on the individual and whether they need additional supplements to help them. And I think if you don't test a lot of these different minerals in the body, then you don't really know. And the body tries to keep minerals pretty tight. We know that from serum calcium levels, even to some extent red blood cell magnesium. But I think it's worthwhile. I like to use a test, just a strip that you can purchase, and it's from Vessel Health. I have no affiliation with them other than I feel like it's just a way to get a gauge on where you're at with certain things. And what the Vessel Health strip does is basically you urinate on the stick and then you wait a couple of minutes, like 3 minutes, and then you scan it with an app. And it gives you an assessment of your hydration. It does vitamin C, it does magnesium. And actually, it was the thing. Do you know this test?
I don't know this. Oh. Interesting for me. Wow.
Yeah, no, I was thinking by your expression, like, oh, maybe you know this.
No, I'm loving it because I always think of, micronutrient testing, which is much more involved. So this sounds...
It is much more involved. And this only gives a couple of things. So I'm just speaking to magnesium. And for me, personally, it was what informed me that my diet was not enough, that I needed to start taking more magnesium because my levels, even in my urine, showed that, they were very low. So I wasn't having a good, healthy balance. So, even if it's something like that, if we can't afford micronutrient testing or we can't get to the place of actually getting that done for some reason, there can be some other ways to note. And, that makes me think about hydration too.
They order this online or you can get it?
Yeah, you can order it online through Vessel Health.
Oh, that's cool.
I believe that research is done through the University of California, San Diego, UCSD. So they have done a lot of interpretive work on that.
Oh, that's great because magnesium is such an issue and people aren't getting enough. And, it has all sorts of consequences. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Magnesium, you said also vitamin C.
And vitamin C, it's got pH. It used to have cortisol. They changed some of the parameters depending on when you do it because of the research or testing methods. But I know for sure the magnesium was part of it.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And, I think the reason why people need magnesium and other minerals as well is because there's so much awareness around having purified water that people are thinking, oh, I need reverse osmosis at home. I need a system, my Kangen water, my, whatever system that they're using for water purification and replenishment. Sometimes it doesn't have the full complement of different minerals. So I think it's really important, number one, to just test your water. I remember the case of a man where I did a home visit. So he was experiencing constipation. And I thought, he was in his 80s. And I thought, he was local. So I did a home visit. And it was really interesting because what I found out was that he was drinking water from plastic water bottles. He actually had a separate refrigerator with all of those plastic water bottles. And I was asking him, why do you drink from those plastic water bottles? And he says, well, I just assumed my water coming from the faucet was not pure, and I wanted to be sure I had something clean. So I said, well, why don't we spend $150 and just get your water tested just to see? Maybe you just need something, because I don't think it's good to have the water in the plastic bottles, obviously. So we got his water tested, and it was like mineral-rich water. It was like, I think the pH was 8. It was high in magnesium. It had no toxins to even, be concerned about. It was like, I'd want that water. So, that's why like testing will give you a better sense of, what is all involved. And do you really need to be doing a supplement? Because many times supplements can just be an added expense without good benefit. And that is something I see like with omega-3s, where people are just doing the omega-3 and you can't tell whether or not you're getting a benefit. But if you spend something like just under $50 on a test every 3 months, that can help you with your dose and to know like, okay, I need to stop. I've seen some people where they get way too high in omega-3s. Then you're going to toss the omega-6 out of balance. And then I see some people who supplement and their level still stays low. It's like, well, why is that? Is your body using it, not absorbing it, excreting it, metabolizing it? What's happening there? So then we start to kind of play detective and get into the ditch on that kind of that metabolic piece.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I'm a big believer in if you can, test, not guess, because it's so important and it controls every aspect of your health. So, yeah.
True. And sometimes testing is just a great motivator. For people who can't always afford the testing or they don't have the time to do it, you just have to think of like, if I find out this result, what would I do differently? Do you just want to take action and do those things that are different now rather than needing a test? I think for some people, they really need to know, and they need to know that there's an urgent point at which there's a crossroads. And if they don't make a change now, they're going to have like even more implications later. So yeah, I think testing is good. It's especially good for hormones and bones. I remember getting my first DEXA when I was 40, and that helped me to course correct certain things in my life. I also think that if women are interested in hormone replacement therapy using bioidentical hormones as an example, like if you know what your hormone levels were like when you were in your 30s, then it makes it a lot easier when you're in your 50s going through that transition to know like what level of repletion should I be at? Because I think sometimes we go too high, maybe we're too low, we don't have symptom relief, all of those kinds of things. So anyway, we were talking about color and kind of got diverted onto this, but I do think color is important as like a general principle.
Hey, Margie here. If you're looking for a way to stay motivated and get results in your bone building plan, then I have the perfect solution, the Happy Bones Club. This is my exclusive members community where you get direct access to me on our live monthly Q&A sessions, along with in-depth classes, guided workouts, and interviews with guest experts. So you can continue to learn about all aspects of your bone health and tailor your journey to strength and vitality with the support of a community working towards the same goals as you are. So just go to tinyurl.com/happybonesclub to learn more, or you can click the link in the show notes. I hope you'll join me and be part of this great community. Now back to the show. Okay, so let's see. Should we continue that? I mean, I'm so interested in the hormones as well. Okay, let's continue with your 3 things. So you finished the color.
Yeah, the color. And I'll just say that blue-purple is the color that people consume the least of. So there was a survey about that. So most people don't get enough of those foods because they actually don't occur in nature very often. I have to make conscious effort to buy grapes, to buy blueberries, to buy figs, Prunes are incredible for bones, actually. There is some great work from Dr. Arjmandi. I used to be in the same university department with Dr. Arjmandi going through graduate school, and he was a professor, and he was still doing work on bones and prunes. It's just amazing to think that prunes as a functional food could be helpful with bones, bone mineral density. So he did a lot of animal studies on that specifically. So blue-purple is something we really need to make conscious effort to get. A lot of those purple compounds are like the red, where they're anti-inflammatory. They have brain mood boosting effects. They have implications for cognition and even bone. So getting that whole rainbow, I think, is important, and getting variety within each one is also essential. The second one is creativity, like putting things together that you may not have thought of. Like sometimes we need to get out of our ruts, out of our grooves. We become so regimented with food. And if you keep doing the same thing and you don't change it, how can you expect different results? And so I think being creative about maybe trying a different food, trying it in a different way, and preparing it differently can be helpful. The last one is diversity. And I think diversity is so important. I mean, whenever I have a question, like a more existential, philosophical question, I always try to look to nature. Like, what does nature do? What do we see in nature? What do we see in ecosystems? What happens on the planet? And diversity is the name of the game when it comes to resilience, when it comes to the immune system. The more diverse the gut microbiome is, the better off you are. You're going to be better as it relates to nutritional status. Like if you're eating the same things every day, you actually don't fortify your nutritional status, and you keep hammering on the same nutrients. You might actually compound toxins because you're bringing in the same foods from the same grocery store every week. And so it's like if your body just sees all the same, then you just start accumulating more of that. So diversity is key for so many things. There are associations with fractures and falls. There are associations with, like I mentioned, allergic disease and immune health, the health of the gut microbiome, even for mood. So looking at anxiety. So I think that diversity, in fact, I was exchanging a text with a friend this morning. She was asking me for some, she's a colleague actually. So she's like, Deanna, I want to do a detoxification, I know that you're the person to go to. Give me some recommendations. So we were going back and forth. And one of the things that I mentioned to her, because we were talking about fiber, and she's like, okay, well, I have flaxseed meal. And I said, well, flaxseed meal is great, but it's one fiber. Like if we just think of the gut microbiome just being fed one fiber, you get a monoculture. So what I was recommending to her is I just said, polyculture, diversity of fibers. Like even if you buy a fiber source that has like 4 different kinds of fibers, you're better off. And that's why diversity of foods is important, because we get diverse fibers, diverse nutrients. Maybe we don't compound those toxins in the same way. And we just have an overall changed experience to our body through flavor, and this harkens back to like traditional medicine and nutritional systems where, just even in when I went to Nepal and in India, I mean, you have all of the flavors at one meal so that you don't crave, so that you satisfy all of those chemosensory receptors of the body, right? I mean, that's not why they're intellectualizing it, but, essentially that's what you're doing is like, you're hitting on the bitters, you're hitting on the sweet, the sour, the umami. I mean, it's just so that you don't feel like you're craving something after the meal. So again, I think color, creativity, diversity. I like to sometimes be less intellectual about eating, because I think for some people in the space, they get enamored by the shiny object, right? So it's like the glimmer of like the next diet, the next trend. And I think that if you look to science, like what has stayed the same? What is the thread of truth throughout so many of these things? It's what I have summed it up to be is these color, creativity, and diversity. Now, within color, like some people will say, well, are you just advocating plants? Not necessarily. For some people who would like to have animal protein and bring in animal products, I think that is something that can be played into the color as well. I was just on Drew Perowit's podcast. I was talking about spices And spices are incredible. Like, it doesn't matter what your choice of protein is, whether you're animal protein eater or you're a vegetable, across the board. Again, another common denominator is to bring in these spices, because spices overall, I mean, they have withstood the test of time, right? They were treasured. They were gems. Countries traded over spices. I mean, and so when we look at all the different cultures, there are different kinds of spice, I would say, palettes and profiles, and they have such great benefit for so many different body systems. And that's even something that can bring more diversity and color into people's lives. And especially for people who have cost concerns about eating healthy. A bottle of a good spice, so like a spice blend, like I have one from Sprouts, which is a grocery store where I live. I don't know if everybody has that, but you can find these online, where I have a curry powder with 11 different spice powders in it. So it's like diversity, and it tastes good, and it's anti-inflammatory. So I think eating has to be fun, accessible, happy. And there have been studies showing that having more colorful foods like fruits and vegetables is associated with greater parameters of happiness and life satisfaction. So it's not just that they reduce the risk for chronic diseases, it's also that they help you to change your mood. And if you change your mood, most likely you're going to change your food. And when you change your food, now you're in a different cycle, right? One begets the other. So now you're in a different loop than you were when you had the brown, yellow, and white foods that were inflammatory, bringing your mood down. Because we know that inflammation is also associated with certain psychological states, like greater reactivity, greater irritability, greater anger. All of those inflammatory cytokines, they don't make us feel very good. So often if I'm in a store or somebody cuts me off, I'm driving and I'm just thinking, oh, they're probably inflamed. Most people are inflamed. And so inflammation can start to trickle into, the brain on fire, our mood state. And so, when we start to put that fire out, we start feeling better and we can make better choices.
I love this. So questions then. So these are like adding new questions into our head when we're in, because so many people that I see, they'll be eating relatively healthy, but the same breakfast every single day for years, and the same lunch. Yes, it's a salad, and yes, it's some chicken in the protein, or, yes, it's a vegetable. I mean, it could be healthy, but the same thing day in and day out. And, maybe they have a few rotations, but that's a big thing. So where should people start? I know you have lots of resources too, in terms of your book and things. What would you say to people who are thinking, oh gosh, that is me. I am the same food every single day. Should they ask, like when they're in the supermarket, let me see the colors, or what are your recommendations on how to change this? Because it is a problem.
Yeah. And I would say, try to do what makes the most sense for you. So one of the things, and this is pretty classic when you do an elimination diet, you rotate a food every 3 days. So if I have bananas for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm not going to have bananas again until Monday of the next week, right? So like every 3 days, preferably have a different food, just rotate. And we know that the digestive tract from mouth to anus, typically we're looking at, to get everything out of there, it's about 72 hours. So that's like that 3-day window. You get a fresh gut. Now you're starting from scratch again. So I would say, if you can, rotate every 3 days. And even before that, what I think is really important, if people are into measuring things, which I think is a good practice, I have a 50 food variety tracker. And I basically created it because I had seen a publication from a researcher in the UK. His name is Dr. Miguel Toribio Mateus. And he had this great paper about the brain, the gut, and looking at microbiome diversity. He talked about 50 unique foods in the article, 50. So I was thinking, well, that shouldn't be too hard, 50 unique foods. But it is. Like, you kind of you've got to be aware, because we slip so readily into just doing the same things because we don't want to have to think about it, right? So what I would say to people listening is, like, actually do an inventory. And this is how you do it. So you can use my tracker. You can go on my website, just download it and get the tracker. And the way that you do it is, first of all, I have it just for plant foods. So just to keep it to the plants, because we know that that's what contains a lot of the fibers and a lot of the other things that help to foster a good gut microbiome. So we have it broken out in all of the different categories. So I have it like even herbal tea could be considered as part of this tally. It doesn't just have to be a fruit or a vegetable. It can be a lot of different things. So I actually did this in one of my groups, and people surpass that 50 per day, per week or 7 days, but they had to be really in tune with, making sure that they had different selections. So one of the hacks, if you will, in fact, I was just in a grocery store yesterday and I was thinking about it because many people see the big bag of apples, right? And they see like, oh, all those pink lady. I live in the state of apples. I live in Washington State, and we always have all kinds of varieties of apples here. But most of them get bundled into bags, and then people just buy the big bag. And what I say to people is, instead of and I'm just using apples as an example. We can choose anything, sweet potatoes or a number of different things here with different varieties. Choose within the variety because you actually get different phytochemicals. Even within tomatoes, you get different phytochemicals. So take an extra minute to choose maybe a pink lady apple, a red delicious, a Granny Smith, rather than that one bag of all the same apple type. Even that cultivates variety, and that could be listed on your 50 food tracker. So on the tracker, like if you had 2 pink lady apples, you couldn't write that twice. If you had a pink lady and then you had red delicious, you can write them as separate entries and they would count towards your 50. The American Gut Project, which is a citizen science kind of project where they are measuring what people are eating, and then they look at stool samples and they look at the gut microbiome and such. Basically, what they found is that people who had, I believe it was at 30 different foods per week benefited in terms of their short-chain fatty acid production compared to the people that had less than 10 types of foods per week. So most, at least I can speak for Americans, on the whole, what I have seen is that usually people cycle between 5 to 7 recipes, or just in their heads, they're thinking like, oh, I'm just going to make this tonight because, they just kind of like get in their groove. But if we can just change up again, like one day where when we do our shopping, we just put into the cart or into the basket, like one food that we haven't had recently. And another big thing is eating seasonally. In fact, I'm doing a presentation for the Institute for Functional Medicine at the big annual conference coming up. And it's all about eating in rhythm. I think many of us, because we can get foods from all different places, we just eat all different things. So there's a tender balance to this variety message. Yes to variety. However, variety within the seasonal foods that are available preferentially. And there's a reason for that. A lot of those different phytochemicals in seasonal foods are actually changing up things like endocrine responses, metabolic responses. It's like there's a connection between the circadian rhythm, the circannual rhythm, and our body's rhythm. And many times that's orchestrated through foods that are in season. So if we are eating an orange in the winter, it's like telling the body to store fat, that it's summer, right? And we don't want to be storing fat per se in the winter and just accumulating, right? So like these foods are highly intelligent. They're taking in these intelligent xenohormetic factors from the environment, and then it's up to our bodies to translate those messages. And sometimes that gets awry, that we're not actually streamlining what we need at that time of year.
So interesting. I think this is a challenge for all of us, me included. I'm definitely going to download this because we do get in our ruts, even if they're super healthy ruts, that we are just, making this. So yes, this is, and the fact that it can impact and see how it impacts your health once you do this. That's so interesting. I love this. And so also, I just wanted to, before we end, a couple things. Hormones. I know that you do a lot of work with hormones and food and how that can affect your hormones. You want to just share a little bit, because this is a community where our hormones, I mean, everybody's hormones matter, but it's something that a lot of us are focused on. And do you have any tips in terms of the food with the hormones?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, this is a huge conversation and there's a lot of personalized response here. So, but I'll just speak globally to foods. First of all, if I just think of the macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, and fat, right? What I think is really important for women, especially postmenopausal women, so I'm talking women in their 50s and beyond, that we have adequate omega-3 to omega-6 fats. Like fats form the basis for every cell in our bodies. And so the quality of that cellular communication is determined by fats. So I think fats are really important. I think it is important to have like one measurement a year. They'll keep us in a more anti-inflamed status. And as we lose our hormones, especially estradiol, the inflammation that we can experience can tend to rise. So all kinds of things happen to us as we make our way through that transition, right? Like we have less of a buffer, less of that protection of estradiol. So making sure that we have healthy fats that would ensure that from a cellular perspective, we're more protected. Protein is the talk of, I would say, the day as it relates to women in strength training, skeletal mass versus lean body mass. I think it is important to be looking at protein and getting protein in every meal. I also think that we need to be thinking about our detoxification systems and our liver health as we become postmenopausal, preferably earlier, but for many women, they're going to have more symptoms, I think, if they're not tending to that. So higher dietary protein can actually help to inform different enzymes that are responsible for detoxification. We actually need protein to better detoxify. Now, the thing that often doesn't get said when everybody's talking about more protein, is that we want to be sure that we're digesting it adequately, that we have enough in the way of stomach acid, that we have enough proteolytic enzymes. So for some women who are overstressed or they have maybe poor or inefficient digestion, they might be taking in a lot of the protein, but not actually absorbing the protein, the amino acids that we need. So that's something to think about. I think protein is key as building blocks of neurotransmitters for women going through menopause. They're foundational for mood. And so a lot of mood changes, neurotransmitter changes with the menopausal transition. With carbohydrate, I think some women may lose the metabolic flexibility that they had when they were premenopausal. So in other words, we're going to be more sensitive to the macronutrients, to the caloric intake, to even the timing of when we eat. So what also happens is that the gut microbiome through the menopause starts to change, and it starts to look more like a man's microbiome at that time of life versus what we had when we had estradiol and progesterone at these higher levels, right? Because everything is kind of rippling through and changing the physiology. So what I would say there is making sure that we have more complex carbohydrates, obviously, having more fiber. Fiber is really key, especially going through the menopause. And fiber is also important for mineral absorption. Like there are certain kinds of fibers that can change the gut microbiome to have a different pH. And that pH can help with translocation of certain minerals into the body better. So many people don't think about that. Like, oh, if I have prebiotic fibers and I'm changing my gut milieu, you're actually helping to facilitate things like minerals. Excuse me. So I think that's important. And also thinking about the circadian rhythm of eating. And for some women, what may skew as they go through menopause is that things start to shift where they don't have as much energy as they had when they were pre-menopausal. And so, they might be waking up later. They might be missing the larger breakfast that would prime the rest of the day. So when we eat is just as important, I say, as what we eat, because that acts to give us, it's called the Zeitgeber, a time giver. It's punctuating our circadian rhythm. And when we go through the menopause, many times our circadian rhythm gets dysregulated. So those eating times are really important, and making sure that we have adequate time where we're not eating too close into bedtime, obviously. I mean, I'm giving just some basic guidance, but it almost seems like when we become postmenopausal, we have to be even more, I would say, conscientious. And I think for women who have enjoyed alcohol in their younger days, I think that alcohol can become more problematic from an inflammatory perspective. I've been lecturing on that for some time. I mean, alcohol can change the gut microbiome. It puts a stress on liver health. And it also is associated with increased risk for certain kinds of cancers. So, most women are starting to think about their cardiovascular health, their risk of cancers as they move into the postmenopause. So I just think it makes sense just to, again, that's why I like to focus on like the joy, the color, creativity, diversity, because there can be so many things to think about, right? And so I hope that that's of use.
Oh, yeah. No, all of this is we could talk for hours, but you've given us so many tips. And I know you have the gift that you were talking about that you want to share with everybody so you want to just tell us how we can get in touch with you and how they can, find out more about all the things, you have like amazing things to offer that can really help people do the things you're talking about. I know I'm going to start right away. Both my husband and I, we are going to go on this diversity.
Great. You might be pleasantly surprised. It just depends, right? I think when I first did it, I was at 122. But I had to think about it. Like if I didn't think about it and was just on automatic pilot, I don't know what I would have had. I mean, I was like literally making conscious choices. So, but it is.
I have a lot. I think though I have a lot of the same thing that incorporates numerous things at once. So I think, the little rotation could be very helpful.
That could be good. And then it'll serve you for the first couple of days and then you won't be able to count those foods or spices anymore, right? So yeah, where people can find me is on my website, deannaminich.com. And on the deannaminich.com site, what you will find is that there's a resources tab, because I do like to make a lot of this practical and educational. So there's a resources tab. That's where you can find the variety tracker. And also for your audience, what I thought would be most appropriate is I have a separate 2-page handout on nutrition and lifestyle approaches to hormone health. Like it's impossible to get into all of the weeds and all of the research within a shorter podcast. But by looking at that 2-page guide, I think people can get a better sense of some of the things that might be like, oh, yeah, that's right, I need to do that. Or, oh, I haven't been doing that as well. Or, oh, I never knew that. There can always be some room for improvement. I mean, I find that with myself. There's always something that we can be shifting into and be trying out that can make a huge change in our health. So I think, have fun with it. As people are moving into a different season, be thinking about what can I do seasonally? Like if I'm cleaning the house because I feel like spring cleaning, maybe I need to spring clean my refrigerator. I need to spring clean my wardrobe. I need to spring clean my spice cabinet. What about all of the dusty, whether the bedding or, it's just so much opportunity. Like how we treat our home, our space is so indicative sometimes of what we actually do with our bodies. So if you need more variety in your life and you're saying, oh, my husband and I are going to do that, maybe even try to cultivate that further by rearranging the space in your office or in your living room or in your kitchen. Like small shifts like that can actually create more neuronal plasticity. So overall, you're doing it physically and you're also kind of giving yourself environmental cues that are supportive of that diversity and variety.
Well, I love that. And I just enjoy talking to you and hearing all these great ways to put things into our life that can make such a difference. So with that other handout, will that be on your website or that will be something I should include in the show notes? They're both on
the link. I believe it's also on the website under resources, but just to make it easy for people, you do have the link that they can use to get there quicker.
Oh, perfect. Oh, well, it's been such a pleasure. I can't thank you enough for joining me and sharing all of this great information with everyone. And, as I said, I've been a fan of yours and I love what you do with color and food. And I think it's going to enhance all of our lives. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Lovely having this conversation with you, Margie.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Deanna and have some takeaways that you can put into your life. I know for me now, when I go to that supermarket, I'm going to look at things in a little different way. Color, creativity, and diversity. And I'm certainly going to take her challenge and see how many different foods I can put into my life. So I hope you'll try that as well. All the links that Deanna talked about will be in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.